Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Kemi Badenoch has managed to turn what should have been good news for her campaign to lead the Tories into another example of just how bad she is at politics, and how, if she does end up leading the party, she's going to be giving me a lot of material. So earlier this week I talked about the results of a poll concerning James Cleverly's chances amongst party members. I did say that he had commissioned the poll, but that it wasn't a reason to dismiss it out of hand. And the full results were published by the pollster as well. It's all out in the open. Well, another pollster, YouGov this time, has produced a survey of party members showing that Badenoch would be the favourite. Now, Badenoch has come out and said, well, this is an independent poll. I haven't paid for it. I'm not actually sure who has, though, because there's really no such thing as a truly independent poll. Someone always has paid for it. But, you know, she's saying she hasn't. And she's saying as a result that should be considered more reliable than one that was commissioned by someone involved in the contest. And you go, okay, all right. But then she said something else, or at least her campaign said something else. Someone from her campaign. It wasn't Badenoch herself, but she must have signed off on this statement. But someone from her campaign told LBC, and I'm going to have to quote here, other campaigns are paying for their own polls or to skew the betting markets. To skew the betting markets. What an interesting thing to say, and particularly right now. Now, why is it a particularly interesting thing to say right now? We've just had the news that the Met Police are not going to be taking action against any of the Tories that were involved in that huge betting scandal that erupted during the general election campaign. Now, think about the general election campaign. Seems like ages ago now, doesn't it? But there were a few things that went wrong for the Tories. Rishi Sunak leaving D-Day celebrations early was a massive cock-up. But arguably, the other big cock-up during the campaign itself was the betting scandal. It was massive, and it really did cut through to the public. What the Tories want right now is a leader who moves the party on from that unpopular image of the scandals, the tidal wave of scandals that just kept coming and wouldn't even stop for the election itself. The last thing a credible leader would want is to accuse senior Tories, because no matter who wins, these are still, even if they're not in cabinet, the shadow cabinet, they're still going to be senior Tories because they're famous. So no matter who wins, to accuse senior Tories of basically gambling malpractices, when this has just been the source of a very damaging scandal for the party. It's just a mad thing to say. It made sense to talk about, rivals commissioning their own polls. Maybe you shouldn't pay attention to those. That's just that's normal. You can do that. There's nothing vindictive about that. There's nothing aggressive about that. It's just saying, maybe you should ignore the polls that were commissioned by the people for whom they seem to favour. That's all you're saying there. That's fine. You leave it at that. You've done your job. You don't then have to go on and carry on. Oh, and by the way, while I'm talking about this, yeah, they're probably trying to skew the betting markets, which would be a serious criminal offence. You don't want to accuse big players in your own party of being criminally dishonest. That's what the campaign's doing here. But it's also the sort of statement that is very much in keeping with Kemi Badenoch. You know, and the people she'll attract around herself if she does become leader. You know, the thing about Rishi Sunak that I kept saying was he just didn't understand the basics of politics, and nor did the people he surrounded himself with. They didn't even understand how parliamentary cycles work. In order to recover the Tory polling, Sunak essentially had two main jobs: ease the cost of living, get NHS waiting lists moving down. He couldn't have solved either of those problems as such. But he did have ways to show progress and effectively to be taken serious by voters. If he could have shown some significant progress, they would have gone, maybe you have got a plan. Yeah, it's coming down. Maybe we will give you more time to keep it going down further. And I said, he could do it cynically as well. Because the sort of things he would needed to have done are not the sort of things Conservatives like doing, but he could have done it cynically. He could do some things that would create a temporary feeling of improvement with the intention of cancelling it all the second he won the election, if he won the election, right? Because the Tories kept talking about, we're going to replicate 1992. 1992. Labour were ahead in 1992. Well, they weren't really. But that's what they kept saying. Well, partly the reason why the Tories won in 1992 was being cynical. They made people think things were on the up. You know, they cut their taxes and stuff like that before the election. Then as soon as the election was over, the taps were shut off again, immediately. But Sunak kept talking about putting policies in place which are going to lead to improvements in the long term. Oh, we're doing this now so we get long-term improvements. Kept banging on about this long-term miracle. Now, his policies wouldn't have actually led to improvements in the long term. But you may say, Phil, you're not, you will say that about any Tory government. Yeah, I will. I'll say any Tory government does things that aren't going to lead to long-term improvements. I'm pretty sure I can back that up with facts. But yeah, that's my political leaning. Okay, but never mind that. Anyway, it's completely irrelevant. Let me draw a comparison with what Labour are doing right now. So Labour's manifesto is full of policies. It takes years to implement. But what did they do to decide which ones to prioritise first? They didn't just blindfold Keir Starmer and get him to put a pin in the manifesto, did they? We can see from the King's speech, what they've done is they've prioritised things which will take a few years to really see the effects. Right? So things like the housing policies are being put in really very quickly because it takes years to build houses. The workers' rights, because that will take some time to get all the legislation in place, and working practice has changed to the point where people start to see the better paying conditions coming from that. This all makes sense. You need people to see the benefits of your policies, not immediately. It would be nice, but not immediately. You need them to see them in time for the next election. Labour will be needing voters to think, oh yeah, it was a good idea to vote for this Labour government. Not now, in 4 or 5 years' time. So if you've got a policy, then it's thinking, well, it'll take like a year for the legislation to go through Parliament, then another 2 or 3 years to properly bed in. Well, you do that first because you need those benefits to be seen before the next election. But there's also a lesson with the upcoming budget. So everyone's expecting, and it's certainly in the news, a very tough budget coming from Rachel Reeves this autumn. Rachel Reeves herself is putting about this idea, oh yeah, you're not going to like this budget. But if you're going to have a bad news budget, you absolutely would have it early in the cycle so that the later ones can be all bells and whistles and much more crowd pleasing. So you get, if there's going to be any unpleasant measures coming, get it out of the way immediately, when you can not only blame the previous government, whether you're doing it fairly or not, but also that the first budget, that's not the one the voters are thinking about when they go to the polls. It's the most recent one. Sunak didn't understand this basic wisdom of politics. He was behaving as if he had just formed a government at the start of a parliamentary cycle. That he had time to bed controversial policies in the belief that, oh, but they'll see the benefits in a few years' time. He became Prime Minister with an absolute maximum of 2 years left of the cycle, and he would have been poorly advised to plan an election in autumn. So he should have thought of it as realistically a year and a half, with maybe an extra half year if it really went badly. Even in a stable government, when you've got less than 2 years to go before the election, you are prioritising policies which will deliver short-term improvement, especially to your target voters. That is just how it works. Everything has to be designed around your policies peaking in terms of public approval just before the election. I mean, so when you've got controversial policies, all ones which are going to take a while to see the benefits, you implement them years before the election. Because then the controversial ones, people have sort of forgotten about the controversy by the election. It's sort of blown over. Or the bad things they thought were going to happen haven't happened. As long as it's a good policy, that'll be the case. And so you think, oh, it was all right after all. So, and then you leave the stuff which doesn't take long to work until the end. It was a mark of just how bad Sunak was at politics. He just didn't get this, and nor did his advisors. And although Badenoch will not herself be making this specific mistake if she becomes Tory leader, because she won't be in a position to, she won't be in government, she's still clearly not someone who thinks in political terms, just like Sunak. Just like Sunak. And they're not the only ones, to be fair. Badenoch seems to be focusing like this. She's constantly trying to please a very narrow audience. She focuses this pitch 100% of the time on this very narrow audience, which is not the audience which ultimately decides the success or failure of her endeavours. Politics does have to be fairly narrowly focused, particularly in a first past the post system. But you focus it on people who decide the outcome of the election. Sunak made no attempt to get his party to appeal to target voters, because his daily concern were Tories, particularly on the right of the party, the far right, who wanted that focus to be on voters who would also have been very right-wing switching to Reform UK. That meant Sunak kept his party's gaze on their right flank instead of the centre. Badenoch's the same, but with Badenoch you've also got someone who just gets very, very easy things wrong as well. And this latest accusation of skewing betting markets seems like a small thing. It's just a tiny little thing. I haven't even seen anyone else pick up on it. In the LBC article, no one mentioned, oh, this is an odd thing to say. You know, it's maybe one of those things that when you're like me, an introvert who overanalyzes everything, you just pick up on. But for me, it's the sort of statement that couldn't be made by someone who is focused on repairing damage to the reputation of the party. It's an indication to me that Kemi Badenoch just wants to be leader of the party, and she is not even thinking of turning that party into a unified force. Because leadership contests can be tricky, because by their nature you are going to expose divisions, disagreements within your party. Nature of the beast, that has to happen. But, you know, there is a line between rivalry, differences of opinion, and self-defeating friendly fire. Suggesting that a leadership campaign that commissions its own poll might be skewing the results. Okay, you get away with that, right? But accusing someone who will be back on your side after the contest of committing a serious criminal offence of the sort that's already cost your party recent reputational damage. Yeah, that's what I would call pretty stupid if you want to present your party for the next election as honest and acting in the national interest. But like I've said before, if the Tories want to pick Badenoch to lead them, they can be my guest. Maybe I could put a bet on her not even lasting as leader until the next election. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.